Claire Whitfield had a photo of her 8-year-old daughter taped inside her wallet, right next to a set of identification cards that belonged to a woman who did not exist. For 14 months, Claire had not been Claire at all. She had been Renee Carver, a calm and confident logistics broker who could move anything from one city to another without asking questions. Every night before she left for the job, she looked at that photo and reminded herself why she was doing this. Somewhere out there, a man was flooding her home state with enough poison to bury a generation of children just like hers, and Claire had spent over a year of her life becoming someone else in order to stop him. What she did not know was that two men wearing badges, men who had sworn the very same oath she had, were about to make her the target of the biggest mistake of their careers. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The city of Fairview Heights had a reputation for being quiet, the kind of place where neighbors still waved from their porches, and the local paper covered high school football more than crime. But underneath that quiet reputation, a small unit inside the police department had been running its own operation for almost 3 years. Officer Danny Marsh and Sergeant Wayne Colton were both decorated members of the department's narcotics task force, the kind of men who got their pictures taken at community fundraisers and thanked publicly at city council meetings. Nobody in Fairview Heights had any reason to suspect that these two men had turned their badges into tools for their own private business, one built on stolen cash and stolen drugs taken from the very people they were supposed to be arresting. Their method was simple, and it had worked for them more times than anyone would ever be able to count. They would pull over a driver they suspected of carrying money or product, take everything of value, and then leave behind just enough of their own confiscated narcotics to justify an arrest. The victims were almost always people involved in some level of illegal activity themselves, which meant they had no one to complain to. A drug courier robbed by 2 police officers cannot walk into a station and file a report. Marsh and Colton understood this better than anyone, and they had built an entire second income around that simple, ugly truth. They believed, with the kind of confidence that only comes from years of getting away with something, that they had found the perfect crime. On a rainy October evening, an informant called Officer Marsh with a tip that would change everything. A woman driving a dark sedan was moving what the informant described as a serious amount of cash through the industrial side of town, and she appeared to be working alone. The informant did not know her real identity. He did not know she carried a badge of her own, hidden beneath the lining of a leather jacket, connected to a wire that had been recording every conversation Renee Carver had for the past 14 months. He only knew that she looked like an easy target, and to men like Marsh and Colton, an easy target was the only information that mattered. Claire was driving toward a rendezvous point that night, carrying $500,000 in federal funds meant for a controlled purchase that would finally give investigators enough evidence to take down a distributor named Victor Reyes, a man believed to be responsible for moving narcotics across 3 states. This was the night 14 months of sacrifice had been building toward. Her commanding officer, a steady and serious man named Captain Rossi, was parked 3 miles away, inside a surveillance van, listening to every word transmitted through her hidden wire, flanked by a tactical team, ready to move the moment things escalated. Everything had been planned with precision. Nobody in that van expected the headlights that suddenly appeared behind Claire's car, flashing red and blue through the rain-soaked windshield. Rossi's voice came through Claire's earpiece almost immediately, tense and controlled. He told her the plates did not belong to Reyes's people. They belonged to local police, a unit that had never been looped into the operation, because federal agencies often kept certain details from local departments to prevent leaks. Claire understood the danger of that gap in communication before Rossi even finished the sentence. If these officers pulled her over and she was forced to reveal her real identity to protect herself, 14 months of work could collapse in a single moment, and a dangerous man could walk free to keep flooding communities with the very product she had been sent to stop. Rossi gave her one instruction, delivered as calmly as he could manage under the circumstances. Stay in character. Whatever happens, do not break cover. Claire pulled over onto the gravel shoulder and watched in her side mirror as two men stepped out of an unmarked car, one approaching her window with a flashlight raised high enough to blind her, the other moving toward the passenger side with his hand resting near his weapon. She had trained for confrontations like this, had rehearsed 100 versions of staying calm under pressure, but nothing about her training made this moment easier. Officer Marsh demanded her license and registration, in a tone that made it clear this was never going to be a simple traffic stop. And when Claire questioned why she was being pulled over, he ordered her out of the vehicle before she could finish her sentence. What happened over the next several minutes would later become the single most important piece of evidence in the entire case against Marsh and Colton. Claire was pulled from her car, searched roughly, and made to stand in the rain while Colton opened her trunk without asking for permission or presenting any cause. Inside sat a black canvas bag holding the $500,000 in federal funds, banded and organized exactly as it had been prepared that afternoon. Colton's reaction, captured clearly through Claire's wire, would be played back for a federal jury months later. He did not report finding the money to dispatch. He did not radio it in as evidence. Instead, he quietly zipped the bag shut, lifted it onto his shoulder, and reached into his own jacket pocket. What came out of that pocket were 2 sealed packages of heroin, taken from an earlier raid and never logged into evidence the way department policy required. Marsh and Colton had used packages like these before, treating them as a kind of insurance policy, something to place into the trunk of anyone unlucky enough to be caught carrying real money. They tossed the packages into Claire's trunk in the exact spot where the federal cash had been sitting only seconds earlier, and within minutes, Renee Carver was placed under arrest for trafficking narcotics she had never touched. Claire allowed herself to sound frightened, allowed her voice to shake as she pleaded that the drugs were not hers, because the woman she was pretending to be would have done exactly that. Inside, she remained steady, aware that every word being spoken around her was being recorded by a federal server 3 miles away. She was placed in the back of the patrol car and driven toward the precinct, while Marsh and Colton spoke openly about how they planned to split the money, mentioning numbers, mentioning an account overseas, mentioning how easy this particular stop had turned out to be. Neither man understood that the bag they had just stolen contained more than cash. Hidden inside the canvas lining was a tracking device no larger than a coin, and every bill inside that bag had been marked with a chemical compound invisible to the naked eye, but easily identified under specific lighting. Its serial numbers already logged into a secure government database days earlier. The moment they opened that bag in private, they had unknowingly started a countdown that neither of them could see. At the station, Claire was booked under the name Renee Carver, fingerprinted, photographed, and placed into a holding cell, while Marsh filled out an arrest report describing a routine traffic stop that had uncovered narcotics through what he called probable cause. He never mentioned the cash. He never mentioned that dispatch had no record of any drugs being carried in that vehicle prior to the stop. 9 hours passed while Claire sat on a cold metal bench inside that cell, ignoring the stares of officers who walked past, assuming they were looking at a convicted trafficker. She did not know exactly how the next 24 hours would unfold, but she trusted the plan that had been building for over a year, and she trusted that somewhere outside those bars, federal agents were already tracking a blinking signal that led directly to Officer Marsh's garage. That garage sat behind a modest house in a quiet residential neighborhood, the kind of place where Marsh and Colton had celebrated smaller scores in the past, without ever worrying about consequences. That same night, the two men sat surrounded by empty bottles and stacks of banded cash, congratulating themselves on what they believed was the easiest $500,000 they had ever taken. Colton joked about retirement. Marsh talked about opening a business somewhere far from Fairview Heights, somewhere warm, somewhere no one would ever ask questions about where his money had come from. Neither man noticed the small tracking signal broadcasting from inside the very bag they had emptied onto the workbench, a signal already being watched from a secure command center across town by federal agents who had been building this exact moment for over a year. The following afternoon, Claire was brought before a judge for what appeared to be a routine arraignment, and it was there that Assistant United States Attorney Harrison Blake made his first appearance, presenting credentials that immediately silenced the courtroom clerk, who had assumed this was nothing more than another narcotics case. Blake requested a private conference with his client before any proceedings continued, and once the door closed behind them, the exhaustion Claire had been hiding for 9 hours finally showed on her face. Blake handed her coffee and confirmed what she already suspected. The recordings from her wire were clear. The arrest report Marsh had filed contained statements that directly contradicted the timeline captured on both her hidden microphone and the dashboard camera inside the patrol car. Every signature the two officers had placed on official paperwork had transformed a case of simple theft into something far more serious under federal law. Later that same day, Officer Marsh and Sergeant Colton were called into their captain's office, told only that it concerned a commendation for their recent arrest. They walked in expecting recognition, and instead found federal agents waiting for them, along with an internal affairs investigator holding a thick folder of evidence collected over the previous 14 months. When Captain Rossi played back the audio recorded from Claire's wire, the two men heard their own voices discussing how they planned to plant narcotics on an unsuspecting driver, how they intended to split $500,000 in stolen federal funds, and how confident they had been that no one would ever be able to prove otherwise. Marsh reportedly went pale as the recording continued, realizing that every word he had spoken in what he believed was a private moment had already been heard by prosecutors preparing his indictment. The door to the office opened one final time, and Claire Whitfield walked in wearing her real uniform, a federal badge clipped to her belt in place of the forged identification she had carried for over a year. She looked directly at the two men who had thrown her against her own car in the rain, searched her without cause, and stolen federal money meant to take down a dangerous narcotics distributor. She did not raise her voice. She simply reminded them that she believed they still had something that belonged to her. The silence that followed, according to those present in the room that day, was unlike anything anyone in that department had ever experienced. Two men who spent years exploiting the trust placed in their badges finally understood that the woman they had humiliated in the rain had been the one holding all the power the entire time. In the months that followed, both Marsh and Colton were formally charged with a long list of federal offenses, including theft of government property, evidence tampering, deprivation of rights under color of law, and perjury connected to the false statements included in their official report. During the trial, prosecutors played the recordings for the jury, walked them through the marked currency discovered in Marsh's garage, and presented dashboard footage that made clear exactly how the arrest had unfolded from beginning to end. Claire testified calmly, describing every detail of that night without hesitation, and by the time closing arguments were finished, there was little question about what the jury would decide. Both men were convicted on nearly every count brought against them. At sentencing, the judge overseeing the case spoke directly to Marsh and Colton before announcing their punishment, telling them that they had taken an oath meant to protect the very people they chose to exploit for personal gain. Each man received a lengthy federal prison sentence, effectively ending any future they had imagined for themselves in that garage the night they emptied Claire's bag onto their workbench. Claire sat quietly in the courtroom as the sentence was read, thinking not of the two men in front of her, but of the operation that had continued in the background while she sat in that holding cell. Because she had refused to break character during the traffic stop, the larger investigation into Victor Reyes remained protected, and federal agents were able to move against his network within days of her arrest, dismantling a distribution operation responsible for moving narcotics across 3 states. Claire returned home not long after the trial ended, back to a small house where her daughter waited for her, unaware of just how close her mother had come to losing everything during those 14 months undercover. She did not speak publicly about the case beyond what was required in court, choosing instead to quietly return to her work, aware that somewhere else in the country, another operation would eventually need someone willing to disappear into another life for the sake of a case that mattered. She kept that photo in her wallet, the same one that had reminded her every single night why she had chosen this work in the first place, and she carried it with her into whatever came next.